The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise in support of this bill and to note that Labor will be supporting it to Select Committee, and it's good to see a bill that has the largely multi-partisan support of the House, and the lifetime of the bill so far has encompassed several governments, no surprise, because it is a veritable telephone book of economic justice, as it were. Mr Speaker, there is common ground philosophically behind the need for this bill. It is common ground that markets, and in particular firms, are the drivers of our economy. It is common ground, as evidenced by this bill, that for markets to work appropriately and properly and for the public's interest to be safeguarded, there have to be rules of conduct. That's why it's called the Financial Markets Conduct Bill. And I think it's bipartisan as well that in the recent history of this country there has been far too much misconduct, and that has cost far too many New Zealanders far too much in terms of their life savings. The Hall of Shame is well known to all of us. The names are written to our history, and they're written to the personal histories of the families whose retirements have been prejudiced by their actions. Lombard, Blue Chip, Hanover, and of course the largest corporate collapse in New Zealand history and the most expensive to the New Zealand taxpayer, South Canterbury Finance. So, Mr Speaker, what do those finance company failures have in common, and what have we learnt from them in respect of legislation that's being brought to the House? Before I go to that, may I state the obvious, which is in 500 pages of legal detail. I don't think any member in this chamber at the moment, with the possible exception of the former Minister on Leanne Dalziel and the current Minister, would be equipped to comment in great detail about many of the clauses, but that is why we have a select committee process and why we all, in good faith, are going to engage with submitters and wrestle with the detail of this bill. It raises, secondarily, Mr Speaker, the important point that we are exceedingly dependent upon officials on matters such as this because of the arcane and technical legal detail in the bill, and because it is subject matter which itself is inherently complex. For example, the market for financial derivatives, advanced mathematics, very, very opaque financial instruments, and regulators have to be on their toes to see through some of the structures. The consequences of not doing that adequately, Mr Speaker, are weighing us all down to this day. The overhyped financial bubble of the last decade, which burst in 2008 worldwide, was in large part driven by the kind of conduct that this bill seeks to outlaw in New Zealand. The inappropriate disguising of risk, the transferring of that risk to unsuspecting investors without due notice or information, the inability of the investor to make prudent decisions because others have been deliberately or perhaps innocently skewing the information that they receive and clothing it in a cloak of secrecy or dissembling. So, Mr Speaker, it is, I think, universally, well, almost universally, because I think the Greens are reserving their position until they see some more detail. It's almost universally agreed that the general intent of this bill is important. Now, what is particularly important is for a very small country like New Zealand, where we are quite dependent upon, for better or for worse, foreign investment to fuel our economy. It is even more important that the conduct of our market gives investors, both domestic and foreign, confidence that their investments are safe, that the behaviour in the market will be appropriate, and that therefore they can stand or fall on the prudence and smartness of their investment, but they don't need to worry about criminal or quasi-criminal behaviour on the part of the companies they're investing in or through. And that is why the very detailed prescriptive nature of this regulation is designed to preempt malintent or lack of clarity on the part of the companies, and thus to protect the investors themselves. Which of course touches on an important philosophical point, and one which I expect members opposite would agree with us on, that the law in commerce has to provide for the fact that the business of business is to make profit, that if unrestrained, sometimes that profit is made in the short term at the expense of others and sometimes by cutting corners, and that therefore we have a public duty to ensure that the conduct of markets is appropriate. I see nodding of heads, and I think it's a motherhood statement. But let's reflect then on the narrative that is being played out in the wake of the recession in public politics terms here. I think it was the Minister of Economic Development, Mr Joyce, who described the Labour Party as the party of can't do and tried to say his government was the party of can do. Here is a bill being brought down by that government which is 500 pages of can't do. And I say congratulations. That's right, that's appropriate. So let's get beyond this oversimplified, over-polarised view that all regulation is bad. Here's 500 pages of regulation without prejudice to submissions and without prejudice to the ability to improve them, which should have a beneficial effect on markets, which should increase the level of investment in the New Zealand market and the quality of that investment, which should contribute in some meaningful way to more jobs, higher growth and higher incomes if we're doing our work well, because it will provide a safe and hopefully relatively level playing field for the conduct of business activity. Or to put in more historic terms, if you like, capitalism's great at earning a crust, but left to its own devices, it often falls in on itself. And that's why the dynamic tension between government and market is essential for the market itself. So today, in summary, Mr Speaker, we are celebrating at the sending on of this very detailed piece of legislation to the Commerce Select Committee. We are celebrating what unites us in this chamber, a desire to do the best for all New Zealanders. We are recognising our limitations as politicians, that the detail in here is enormous, and we are all pledging in good faith to work through that detail with the help of public submissions. This is what democracy should be about. Parliament working together to advance the public interest. Parliament working together to foreshorten the ability of markets on their own to act against that interest. The converse has been seen writ large in the lives of far too many people, and sir, we hope that this bill will help to put an end of financial markets misconduct.
Call Jonathan Young.
Mr Speaker, it's a sad thing, but it's